let's examine the proposals from various parties for political reform. In studio, we are joined by outgoing Laois Offaly TD Charlie Flanagan of Fine Gael, Councillor Paul Hogan, the Sinn Féin candidate for Longford Westmeath, and with us on the phone is Fianna Fáil TD for Laois Offaly, Sean Fleming. In order to be inclusive, by the way, we extended an invitation to Labour Party TD Willie Penrose. He cannot be here owing to a bereavement. His running mate May Sexton was contacted several times by our staff and has not made herself available. This will be an open discussion. There is some common ground between the parties and naturally many areas in which they differ, so hopefully this will be one of our more civilised debates. We'll start with each participant taking 60 seconds to explain to you their party's plans for political reform, beginning with Paul Hogan.
Thanks very much, Will, and good morning to all of your listeners listening into this broadcast. I suppose from the outset it's clear that the political system that we have currently has failed the people of this state, and it has only served to protect those who have abused the public office. Sinn Féin's proposal, while increasing voter participation, we also want to see increased female participation in making decisions at a national level. Sinn Féin would cut ministerial salaries by 40% and TD salaries by 20%. And we also want to have, more participation, more proportionality, and more representation. Because we want to end the cronyism and the corruption, and we would also legislate to impeach any TD who was involved in the misappropriation of public money.
Okay, Laois Offaly Fine Gael TD Charlie Flanagan, the Fine Gael proposals on political reform.
Morning, Will. I've been in the Dáil for a number of years and I've seen firsthand the paralysis that has overcome our political system because of many years of cronyism under Fianna Fáil. That must change. The Fine Gael proposals will see the greatest amount of constitutional change and political reform since we passed Bunreacht na hÉireann in 1937. I say the change must start at the top. We cannot ask others to change the system and make sacrifices unless we're going to not only do the same but lead by example. We're going to cut the number of politicians. We're going to cut the pay and conditions of politicians. Change, we say, must be fundamental and comprehensive. And the change must involve the citizen. And that's why we will have a constitutional day within a year of taking office where we will offer people the opportunity of fundamentally changing the way we do our business and assisting us in that reform.
And Sean Fleming, the Fianna Fáil proposals for political reform.
The key thing Fianna Fáil is proposing is that we would have a mixed system for electing people to the Dáil there, and you would have TDs elected on a constituency by constituency basis and then other TDs elected on a national basis into the same Dáil. The national basis, people are familiar with the European election, the large electorates, by province. We would extend that to one national list, so you would have a mix of people in addition to people elected locally. Secondly, we also say that we would look at reforming the Seanad, and we would make a number of changes, but we would only abolish the Seanad if other good things were happening in terms of Dáil reform. We just wouldn't start by the knee-jerk reaction and say we'll abolish the Seanad straight off without further examination. Some people have drawn a conclusion on that and said then they're going to have a discussion on it, even though they've reached conclusions in advance. We are saying we're going to reduce them and the amount of money that parties can receive from corporate donations. We had the bill published, but when the government collapsed, we didn't get an opportunity to pass it in advance. And then the other thing we're saying is that ministers should be relieved of constituency work. Essentially, ministers then shouldn't be constituency TDs.
All right, Sean Fleming, that's the 60 seconds. We'll come back and explore some of those points in more detail. But let's begin with the open discussion. And in fact, we'll take a quote from the Fianna Fáil manifesto that the current electoral system has flaws. It encourages an almost perpetual campaign, that there is a clear disjoint between what is required to be elected and the work of an effective parliamentarian. Sean Fleming, can you expand on what's meant by that statement?
Well, I'll be upfront with you. Being a TD, to get elected as a TD, people say, look, he's a nice, pleasant fella, he is a good fella to chat to, and people like their local TD, and the local TD likes to be liked. And I hope Charlie and I would fall into that category to some extent. But what people really want in the Dáil is people who are about their business, not just nice lads to have a pint with. And you see, there is a bit of being popular. You need to be popular to be a TD, But there's more than that when you are a TD. You actually need to be effective and well briefed on the area and have a knowledge. And I am finding...
Right, so does that mean that our TDs to date have been incompetent?
No, it doesn't. I said you need both, right? And what I'm saying, you do need a mix. And what we are saying is... we started a number of years ago by taking TDs off of councils for filling potholes and footpaths, and people didn't like that at the time. Now everyone accepts that TDs shouldn't be doing that, and we are saying we now need to move on.
Okay, but what's your proposal for the future then?
Our proposal, primarily, the first one is that ministers, when they become ministers of government, it's a bit like the American system.
Yeah, okay, no, but let's focus on this disjoint between what is required to be elected and the work of an effective parliamentarian. If a politician is to sit in the national parliament and conduct national duties, your argument is that they cannot satisfy some of what is required locally. So how do you remedy that?
Well, the principal remedy, as I was just about to say, was we are saying once a cabinet minister is elected to cabinet, he should resign his Dáil seat, so he doesn't have to, and the electorate won't be asked them to fill the local pothole or put in a letter to the council to help somebody with the housing. He'll say, I'm not the local TD. You can go to a person locally to do that through the local authority. I am now running a government department. So to an extent, we are saying ministers should be relieved of all constituency work and do the job they're elected to do as in government. And people do complain about government ministers going around to local funerals of people around the country when they should be in their departments doing work.
Okay, Charlie Flanagan, what's your response to that idea?
Well, what Sean didn't tell us is that he's introducing a whole new layer of politicians, the TD substitute. Am I right, Sean?
Yeah. Oh, yes. No. It'll be on the list it'll be on the list like the European Parliament election.
Okay. So how do you find fault with that layer, Charlie Flanagan?
Yeah, I have a problem because I think part of the difficulty is the politics is too big at the moment, and that's why we're offering a clean slate. Abolishing the Senate wasn't something that was taken lightly or a knee-jerk reaction, but it was taken by looking back over 70 years of the Senate and how useful
really?
Is
because
the Senate.
When Enda Kenny first announced it, he took some of your own senators by surprise. Nicky McFadden was on this programme. She was shocked.
He did, but since then we've had a comprehensive debate on the matter, and I don't believe Nicky McFadden or anybody else takes issue with this decision that we feel in the circumstances that the Senate hasn't been serving its purpose, and that rather we would look for a more busy and reformed Dáil, and that we can continue to serve politics in a meaningful way with one parliament.
But by having fewer politicians.
And by having fewer politicians. We're going to cut the number of TDs by 20%. We believe the ratio...
20%? Is there a rationale for that figure?
Well, if you look at the current ratio, it's one TD for between 20 and 30,000 members of the population. That is significantly different to other jurisdictions. We believe it should change. We've started with 20%. It will probably mean a reduction of the numbers of TDs in the Laois Offaly constituency. There is, however, and this is what I agree with Sean Fleming, there is a very personal relationship between the TD and the member of the public. And while TDs as a whole might be collectively maligned, there is a lot of respect for the individual local TD. I make no apologies.
Do we not have a system where politicians elected to the door and have to go around and satisfy very local issues, which technically a county councillor is better suited to?
It's a question of balance, and that's why during this campaign particularly, we're working as a team. Yesterday I was out with Councillor Tom Mulhall in Emo. Today I'll be out with Councillor David Goodwin. We're out with Councillor Mary Sweeney and Matt Keegan in Port Laois. They will deal with the local issues, which is their role and function as county councillors. I will deal with the national issues, but we're team players in Fine Gael, and I don't believe that there is need to add an extra layer by having, we say, substitute TDs or people who are going to be paid for doing the job that a minister should be doing as a TD. Okay. It's a question of balance.
I want to give Paul
I make
Hogan
no apologies for doing clinics, Will. I make absolutely no apologies for doing clinics because that keeps me well grounded and in touch with the people I represent.
Yes, but the question is, does it divert from the work that you should be doing in the National Parliament? And we'll come back and explore that in a moment.
It's a question of balance, and I do the clinics on Fridays and Saturdays, but it's important that we keep in touch because I can only reflect and represent the views of the people of Laois Offaly if I'm well informed. There's no better way to be well informed than by going around the constituency, seeing people
I want to split the time
on a day-to-day
basis.
basis.
As I can. Paul Hogan, then, the Sinn Féin proposal is to change the constituencies into 7-seaters. What's the thinking there?
Yeah, it's to change constituencies, on a 5 to 7-seaters. Well, it's to make it more representational. I suppose, and just relating it to the previous point, the primary focus of a TD is to legislate. we would see greater empowerment to local government, greater accessibility to public services, which would allow the TDs then not to spend time on personal or local matters, but to legislate for the country. I suppose in relation to the 5 to 7 seaters, what we're proposing is that 1/3 of the Dáil makeup be elected or be selected, I suppose, by a list system. And the other
to give greater access to smaller parties.
Well, not really. Well, it's a mixture of things. It is, I suppose, from our own point of view, it's to increase female participation at national level, to make the sitting hours of the Dáil more family friendly.
But
to make it more representational.
The list system, if it accounts for 1/3, wouldn't ensure parity of female representation, and that's something you note in your document, that you want parity of female representation. So how do you address the balance?
Absolutely. What we want is, that it's recognised that there is a deficit in female participation at national level. I suppose from our own internal workings of the party, our Ard Corla is elected on the day of the Ard Esh by a 50-50 election. There's 6 females, 6 males. What we want to see is more females taking on decisions at national level, because never in the history of the Dáil has there been female participation exceeding 14% of the membership.
Okay, but that could be an aspirational goal. How do you turn it into a reality?
Yeah, well, what we're saying is that, firstly, you need to have more females on the ticket. That's the first thing, and I suppose it takes credence, I suppose, that you need more females getting involved at a local level, and you have to look at all of the selection conventions and the workings of that. But what we're hopeful is that if there was proper facilities put in place, like childcare, there's a whole cultural aspect that needs to be resolved. That if those measures were taken, that you may have the possibility of increasing female participation, because as it stands, we're 23rd out of 27 EU states in relation to female participation at a national level.
Well, I'd certainly like to hear from some women to get their views on that.
Well, listen, I don't disagree with what Paul has said, but I mean, he should really practice what he preaches. He's been talking about female politicians. He's a male candidate himself. Mr. Stanley Laois Offaly is a male candidate. Whereas, for example, if you look at Fine Gael, Alwyn Enright was a fine public representative in Laois Offaly. We have Councillor Marcella Corcoran is on the slate in Laois Offaly.
So you've 25% representation
and Senator
on
Nicky
the Fine Gael ticket.
But we still have to legislate for that, Charlie.
I would like to see a situation where we would have at least one woman on every ticket, and I'd ask the other parties perhaps to follow suit.
Sean Fleming, would you agree with that?
Would agree with that, but the main thing is it's not just a question of passing a law to make it happen. You actually have to make politics more friendly. I find even going to party meetings in the evening time and public meetings in the evening time, it tends to be men, because unfortunately, for one reason or another, when children are at home, the house, women don't have the same availability or choose.
Right, but are these lifestyle choices that really people can't influence in terms of legislating for?
Yeah, I actually believe we want to change the hours of politics. Like, if parties were to have meetings, during the day, when women would be maybe more inclined to be able to be available. They say they can't come out at 8, 9 o'clock at night when a lot of the political meetings are happening around the constituencies. And I think changing the days, changing the timetables and making, the hours more regular, I think would actually suit.
But is there a strange glass ceiling for women in that if you look at residents groups and local committees, community groups, women tend to be actively involved, but they don't make the transition into politics? Paul Hogan, any theories on why that might be?
Well, I suppose it's to look at the selection convention, and it's all right for Charlie to say that there should be at least one female for every ticket, but that's fine for a large party. What we're saying is that legislation needs to be introduced to ensure that there is, I suppose, as you said, Will, parity of candidature. And that's what we're saying, that there needs to be more women in politics, but yes, we have to legislate for that.
Okay, just to park that point for a moment, 21 candidates are on the ticket in Laois Offaly. There's only one woman. I mean, all the parties have to share some burden for that. Okay, the Constitution is featured in all of your proposals. And Charlie Flanagan, Fine Gael proposes a Constitution Day. So what will you bring forward to the people on that Constitution Day?
Well, there are a number of issues that we will ask the people to decide upon. Firstly, the abolition of the Senate is not something that we as TDs can undertake ourselves. That's something that must be put to the people. We will be recommending that the people vote for the abolition of the Senate. And we will also be putting in place, if the people decide to do that, we will be putting in place the reforms that we will make to the Dáil in terms of ensuring that the Dáil becomes a busier place, a more constructive place, and a Dáil
Is there no
with
case
enhanced
for
powers.
reforming the Seanad, as Fianna Fáil would make?
I don't believe there is. It's a debate that we could have. I was never in the Seanad. In fact, after 2002, when I was unsuccessful for the Dáil, I was asked to go for the Seanad. I didn't, because I didn't believe that there was a useful role and function for a public representative in the Seanad. And I don't say this lightly, and I don't wish to be dismissive of any institution of state, but I believe that a stronger Dáil, a more powerful Dáil committee system, and a Dáil that complies with the Constitution, Article 14, which says that the government must be answerable to the Dáil, that clearly isn't happening. If you look at what Bertie Ahern and Charlie McCreevy did, particularly over the last 13 years, they removed the powerful function of the Dáil. Important matters of state were undertaken at the opening of pubs, at the back of stands at football matches, and important press conferences were held not in the Dáil but in government buildings. Under our Constitution, and Paul is looking it up here, the Dáil is the primary body under our Constitution, and that needs to be refocused. The initiation of legislation, in ensuring that we have proper and adequate debate, the misuse of the guillotine that we've had where people don't have an opportunity even to speak, and also, for example, the Abilara judgment, which had national consequences, which arose, if you like, in your listenership catchment area, Will, where, for example, the Dáil cannot initiate inquiries, cannot investigate. We have ceded all that to independent tribunals, which have cost millions and millions of euro, which have run into the sand. That can be done by Dáil committees.
Let Fianna Fáil TD Sean Fleming respond to some of those points, that essentially the role and influence of the Dáil has diminished under the Fianna Fáil administration.
Well, I don't accept it as diminished under Fianna Fáil administration. It's operated the same way in the last 12 years since I entered the Dáil as it did before. And I accept, and if you actually listen, the Fianna Fáil proposal tackles that. In fact, most backbenchers in the Dáil on both sides, or opposition TDs, are only there for voting purposes, and they have to follow what their ministers in the Dáil tell them. Our proposal is, once the minister is appointed, he's no longer a TD.
Okay, I don't necessarily want to come back to that particular point.
Okay.
But on the scope of the Dáil, the role that it plays, for instance, sitting days under the Fianna Fáil administration since 1997 have reduced dramatically, and in your manifesto you say that there's no real case for increasing them.
Well, I went back, you see, if you look at our hours, sometimes we sit until 9 and 10 o'clock at night on several days, and that in itself is one of the reasons why we don't have enough of women in Dáil, and those type of hours don't suit people who have family and other commitments outside their career commitments. And in terms of your question, the first question was...
the question essentially is, how can a parliament work effectively if the number of sitting days are reduced over 14 years?
It's very straightforward. In fact, the only proposal Fine Gael have is to sit more time. I would question the quality of the time of the debate that's going on there, because the ministers run the Dáil. The government ministers run the Dáil. I'm saying the best way to improve the Dáil is that the ministers are not sitting in the front row with their backbenchers behind them. Take the ministers out of the Dáil. The minister comes in and makes a proposal like he does in the Seanad, and he has no vote in the Seanad, and the senators then will debate, and everyone knows there is a better debate in the Seanad because the minister is not a member of the Seanad. He goes, presents his case, the much better debate, and you have a much more, if you look at the quality of some of the debates and the legislation, it's better in the Seanad because it's not dominated by the minister.